Chris, thank you so much for coming on board.
Hey, my pleasure to be here.
Appreciate it. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Chris Holshouser. I'm an intellectual property attorney. I work for Getz Baelish here in Farmington, Connecticut.
Sure.
And most of our work is patent law, so we do a lot of preparation of patent applications. We also work in the trademark and copyright fields, and we do a lot of, as we're going to discuss, some emerging work in digital intellectual property and the concerns that revolve around those aspects.
Understood. So in terms of some of that intellectual property, what exactly is intellectual property and how does it affect people doing anything that's digital?
Sure. Well, intellectual property is it's probably a hard concept to define, but it's basically the intangibles, the things that you can't touch it, but it has value regardless. So things like ideas, inventions, the goodwill that you build up in a company that could be represented by your trademark, the expression that you create when you write a book or make a song or something like that.
That's all considered intellectual property.
Exactly.
Now, when you say can be valued, who's valuing that? The creator or the outside world? Because every creator is going to say what they have created is ultimate value.
Well, of course, everything is valued differently, right? So something that's important for me may have no commercial value,
right?
But it would be intellectual property nonetheless. And
Understood.
Of course, other things are considered to be very valuable.
Mm-hmm. Like, give me an example.
Well, let's see. Companies like, let's say, Coca-Cola, or we'll just stick with the soda aspects. Pepsi, they have invested millions of dollars in establishing their trademarks, their slogans, and people recognize them throughout the world. You see a bottle with the Coca-Cola symbol on it, and you know immediately what you're getting when you purchase that. So that's something that's incredibly valuable to those companies, even though it doesn't physically do anything.
So a trademark is further than just the little TM symbol on a name. What exactly can be classified as contributing to a trademark? Because you mentioned Coca-Cola. Is it a flavor? Is it the can? Like, what exactly makes that trademark intellectual?
So, anything that someone can see and identify as indicating an origin of some product. So, like we said, you've got symbols, Ford, you've got the little cross Ford emblem. Tiffany's, the jeweler, you have their blue-colored box that everyone recognizes. These can all indicate the source of a particular product.
Now, what if something, because I see obviously Coca-Cola has the same can shape as Pepsi, right? So the can really can't be classified as intellectual property, right?
Yeah, generally probably not, at least not in that aspect. That's more of a functional aspect of the product as opposed to an indication of the origin of the product.
Interesting. And so when we kind of first met a while ago, because you helped me with a few things, one of our contracts, which is very important for a company like us that's web, where everything is basically up for grabs if people want it.
Right.
You mentioned trade dress, which is a similar type of thing, but it's not necessarily the stealing, right? Tell me a little bit about trade dress and where you see that most common today in either physical product or digital goods.
Yeah, so trade dress is it's considered to be the total look and feel of it could be a product or it could be a store, whatever the customer is being exposed to. So this frequently comes up in product packaging. So the way that the actual product is displayed, the way it appears to a potential customer. This doesn't necessarily have to be a specific mark. It can just be the kind of overall impression that a user gets when they look at something.
Now, what if that thing that the user is looking at is just industry best practice? For example, every website has a phone number on the top right. So a website company can't claim that if you do that, you're falling under trade dress. And a manufacturing firm might have something that they teach every manufacturer to do, which gives the user the same kind of feel and look. Tell me a little bit about how that plays into trade dress.
Yeah, so the things you're describing are would be widely considered to be functional aspects. And these are, like you said, all these websites have them. They're basically stock features that could be incorporated. So those generally wouldn't be considered to be part of the trade dress. And websites are kind of tough because they are frequently include the same general overview. You might have a list of links down the left side, a list of links across the top. You have the different links to product information and things like that at the bottom. And those wouldn't be considered trade dress necessarily.
Interesting.
And like I said, websites are difficult because they include so many of these different stock functions. What you would really want to be looking for trade dress there is some kind of absolute creativity that kind of links the whole website together in a way that's unique. And it's something that you can actually describe and say, this is our trade dress. It's the combination of these features that gives this impression.
Now, are those combination of those features, can that also be technology or code, or is it just a combination of different types of things?
It's really what the user is seeing. And code can be protected in other ways, like copyright or by patent, but generally not by trademark or trade dress.
So when you publish a website on the web, and let's say it was your firm, Getz Bailick's website,
Yep.
and somebody steals the exact same website, they just change the words for it to be their company. What does that fall under? Because they are taking your entire address basically and just reformatting it to be theirs. So they're basically skipping all of the work. And you may never know that they did that because there's so many law firms out there. But if you did know, what are some immediate actions that somebody can take to bring awareness to that?
Sure. So, trade dress, that may not be our best route. Probably we'd be looking at copyright law for something like that. If they really have taken our website and just changed the name, maybe there's some images that are our property that we could pursue under a copyright infringement aspect. Maybe the text can be protected by copyright. So if we have kind of a story of our firm and what we represent, and they just copy that and change the name, there's some possible copyright issues there. But also you have to consider the fact that for most websites, even the images are probably stock. We don't own them most of the time. Someone else may own them and may license them out for our use, or maybe they're just out there for everyone to use.
So you bring up a good point with licensing. The immediate example I think of is with images and video, because we use licensed images and videos all the time, but we pay for them through companies like Adobe, a lot of companies, Envato. They all have licensing options, whether it's audio, video, photo. When I license a photo and video, I'm licensing to use it for my use and not resell it, from my understanding. So when you say that if they're using similar images to yours, if it's your image, if it's Getz Bailick's images, how are you proving that those are your images to a judge who's asking a question like that, or anybody who's considering copyright law?
Well, before we even get to that point, there's probably a few steps we would take first. Before we get to the point where we're going to a judge, it is important to be able to establish that the photographs are ours, and we could do that if we needed to by providing the originals of the photographs and where they came from and that sort of information. Some of your watchers may be familiar with the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is part of U.S. copyright law, and it lays out certain ways that users can address copyright infringement that they see on the internet. And this is really to help promote social media and other companies that distribute a lot of content or post content from users that submit it. So, for example, YouTube gets, I don't know how many submissions they get every day.
Probably
a day. Thousands, millions, who knows? They can't go through all of that and determine whether it's infringing a copyright or not. So the DMCA recognizes that, and it allows users to instead submit complaints to a web host if they think that the content is infringing. So So let's say in your example, another website is using our images. What we could do is we could find their web host. We could say, these are our images, and we want you to take them down or take this website down. And the DMCA provides kind of a standard set of processes that companies have to do to address copyright infringement assertions in order to protect themselves from liability.
Now, what if that person's like, I don't believe that. We're not taking the photos down.
Sure, they can respond to the DMCA takedown request, and they can say, no, these are ours. But they open themselves up to liability in doing so if they're lying about it. And then your next choice might be to proceed the legal route to a court. But
and what does that look like? So I don't want to take down my pictures. I responded to DCMA or whatever the entity is, and I believe that they're not your photos.
Sure. Yeah. That goes into kind of a standardized legal procedure. You file suit in a particular court, claim copyright infringement of whichever images or whichever text or whatever is in question. Exactly. And then the case proceeds like any other.
Now, do those trials usually last long, or are they resolved pretty quickly?
Well, there's no typical in this case. I mean, they can last years, or they can get settled pretty quickly.
Now, my question to you is, how does a court value the damage of that?
Well, again, it depends. I mean, the plaintiff, the person who's putting forth the infringement charge, would need to establish some kind of damages, explain how it damaged them and what the value is. Generally, a jury will have to take that into account and figure out, what damage is appropriate in which case. But the case may not even proceed that far. The two parties may settle before then, in which case.
So lawyer settles with another lawyer, and they kind of say, "Hey, $25,000, this goes away."
Yep.
Type of thing.
Yep. Exactly.
Interesting. And so when you mentioned you had the opportunity to prove that it was your photo first, right? So if that did happen and there was a Getz Bailick photo of you, or maybe it wasn't you, because that's pretty obvious to say this is my photo, right? But let's say it was a picture of a landscape. And how would you prove that that was your photo? Is there like an electronic record on a camera that you would look for, or how does that work?
Yeah, metadata could be useful. You're providing this photo, which is just a digital image. It has data associated with it. And now, even actually going back quite a few years, these have GPS information embedded with them, as well as time, date, things like that. So that can all be useful in establishing ownership of the image.
Interesting. Now, we chatted a little bit about NFTs, non-fungible tokens,
Sure.
which is basically a record that can't be duplicated of the same file. So, which kind of is what you just explained with the metadata of a photo. It's kind of unique in the sense of the longitude, the latitude, the user that created it, etc. Where do you currently see the value of NFTs when it comes to copyright law and all of the things that you do?
Do you mean the value of how copyright law may be relevant to NFTs, or how NFTs may be valuable insofar as they may be protected by copyrights?
Let's do both. I'm interested in hearing about both.
All right. So, copyright law is a huge issue with NFTs right now. I'm sure you've run into this, but there kind of seemed to be a mindset early on, or at least over the last few years, that traditional intellectual property law didn't apply to NFTs. And so people have used all kinds of images that they don't own, minted an NFT that's associated with that digital image, and then they've sold these. I think one of the NFT marketplaces, OpenSea, actually recently said that at least 80% of their NFTs are fraudulent in some way, as in they include photos that the
people don't own,
that the creator probably doesn't own. So this is a huge problem, and it's a huge problem for investors who may be interested in purchasing these NFTs. The big picture concept there is be careful what you're buying. Make sure you know what you're buying. As far as how copyright can let's say how it can advance the value of NFTs, or vice versa. You know, we use the term starving artist as as a term for describing how difficult it is to make money in the art industry.
Sure.
And this is a way that artists have actually been able to more effectively monetize their products by packaging them in NFTs and then selling them to consumers. So there's certainly aspects there for using the images or the media that you have a copyright over and then monetizing it using NFTs.
So somebody takes a picture of me and they decide to upload it as an NFT and mint it.
Yep.
And they just start making money from that somehow. I don't know who would buy that, but they start making money with it.
I would buy that.
Yeah, right. They start buying it, or they start minting it and selling it.
Yep.
What control do I have over my own data that NFT doesn't get minted anymore and it gets shut down and they can't make money from a picture I took of myself? Or is there nothing? Is it such a gray area where you really can't do anything about it? What can I do legally if somebody does steal my art and starts minting it and using it?
All right. So in this case, the picture is yours or the picture is of you?
That's a good question.
There's a difference, right? So the person who takes the photograph in general is the copyright owner, right?
Interesting.
So that can vary. You know, if the person is being hired to take a photograph, then it may belong to someone else. But in general, the person taking the photograph is the copyright holder for that.
So
photograph.
whoever creates the media, it's theirs regardless of what the media is.
Right.
Interesting. So in this event, let's say I took the picture of myself.
Sure.
If I'm the owner and somebody else minted my NFT, what happens?
Sure. Well, again, kind of similar to the previous example we talked about, you could go to the particular NFT marketplace that the individual is trying to market this NFT, and you
the
could
host.
say, yeah, right. You could say, this is my picture. You know, this is the evidence. Say you have the picture posted on your Facebook or something like that.
Sure.
This is a picture of me that I took. This person is using it without my permission, and I want you to take it down.
Interesting point, though, because wouldn't it be Facebook's property at that point?
No, Facebook doesn't take control of the copyrights associated with the pictures.
I see. And they do that to limit liability.
Well, they do it because there's no way that they could necessarily take the copyright of the photo. Now they can show the photo because you uploaded it to Facebook. So in a way, you're kind of giving them a license to use your photograph for their purposes, but you remain the copyright holder.
Interesting, because at any moment I can delete the photo.
Sure.
So I have control over it.
Yep.
Because I'm licensing it to Facebook.
Right.
Now, where do you see NFTs being used in the near future with things that we own and we trade? Like we talked about the house a little bit.
Yeah.
What are your overall thoughts about usage of NFTs and specifically in that house situation? Anything that you've come across that you would like to share?
Sure. Right now, I think the biggest advantages for NFTs are in kind of the digital realm, you could say. So digital images, digital media, could also be services, things that are performed via the internet. There have been some recent examples of NFTs being used to sell physical property. So you just mentioned a house. I think it was in Florida. There was a house sold recently that used an NFT as the mechanism for affecting the transfer of the house. And I think there was an interesting way of doing it, but I'm not sure that it contributed much to the current system that we use, right? So what happened was the person selling the home essentially sold the house to an intermediary company, which held the house. Mm-hmm. They created an NFT, which has a smart contract embedded therein that includes the rules for the transfer of the property. Mm-hmm. And then the buyer transferred Ether, which is the currency that runs on the Ethereum blockchain, to the intermediary company. The company released the house to the buyer, and the transfer was complete.
So there was still a broker in there.
Right. Yeah. The steps have been rearranged somewhat, but all the steps were still there. The intermediary company performed the home inspection, did all of the kind of due diligence things that you would do when buying a house. And the only advantage maybe was that it was transparent to the buyer and the seller.
Now, what exactly did that intermediary company transferring the monies and the smart contract to the seller and the buyer?
Mm-hmm.
What normally happens? What did that NFT take away in that process?
Yeah, so normally those things would be accomplished between the buyer and seller directly and their agents. You would fill out a physical paper contract. These parties have these rights and obligations. These parties have these rights and obligations. And then you would go through the series of inspections and eventually transfer money and then transfer the title to the house. So all of that still happened. It just happened using an NFT to kind of guide the contractual part of the process instead.
So the NFT in this case was not the title?
No.
Right.
No.
The title's still...
Now, I think that's something that could be maybe a future advantage, as far as NFTs go and physical property. If instead of the kind of the old-fashioned way that we handle real property is you have a title to the house, you sell the house, you transfer the title gets registered with the whatever town that you live in, so everything happens by paper. But it could conceivably be done digitally as well. You could have each house could have a digital ID. I say house, but this could be a plot of land, it could be a car, and then all these things could be recorded digitally in something like the blockchain.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of different blockchains out there. You mentioned Ether, which obviously is the one that they're using for NFTs. It's the most popular one. Which blockchains have you researched, and which ones do you think have the most use? Is that an NFT economy, where it sounds like a lot of people are transitioning their digital goods into NFTs, obviously, because you can monetize it.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me to say that I own something when I'm not the original record. So in a sense, do you think there's a benefit of people starting to mint a lot of these things if it's going to be something that's popular in the future? Or do you think in the near future it's going to change in how we do business for more of what you said, the titles, the cars, and it's going to be more physical goods?
Yeah, it's hard to say where NFTs will contribute value or where they won't contribute value. As far as which blockchains I've looked at, I'm certainly no expert on the differences, the technical differences between all of the different blockchains. So I am somewhat familiar with the Ethereum blockchain, and that is the blockchain that is currently the most popular for NFT exchanges. Although there seems to be a growing shift away from Ethereum because it's not really well suited for NFTs.
Interesting. So where are those things going?
There are blockchains that have been created that actually let me take a step back.
Sure.
So most NFTs use what they call an off-chain way of referencing the digital asset that is associated with the NFT. So to be clear, the NFT does not necessarily include the digital asset. It's just essentially the smart contract, the digital proof of ownership of the digital asset. These assets, so let's say you have an NFT of an ape image, and that NFT doesn't include
the smart contract,
the digital image per se, but the smart contract includes a link to where that digital image is stored, which creates a problem. I don't know if you've encountered link rot with any NFTs, but let me explain what that is.
Sure,
basically,
that'd be great.
Basically, a digital image associated with NFT has to be hosted somewhere on the internet. It's stored in a database somewhere by a web host, and that web host may not be around forever. They may go out of business. Their servers may get shut down. And then what happens to that image that's held at that particular link? Well, it's gone. The NFT can't be updated. It's permanent. The link that's assigned to the digital image is permanently saved with that NFT. So now you have an NFT with no digital asset. And so that's a problem for these off-chain methods of connecting the NFT to the digital asset. So what we're starting to see now is a shift to blockchains that are better suited for on-chain retention of the digital asset. So essentially, in that case, the digital asset is retained with the NFT in the blockchain.
Which blockchains are those, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm not familiar with all the different ones that are kind of popping up right now. It's a lot. It's a lot, yeah. And it's changing very rapidly. But I think we're going to see a shift to that in the near term.
That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, because I guess the art in that situation, like the picture of the ape, is not what's important, because anybody can do that. I mean, somebody could just copy and paste it, right? And so exactly. they have an ape, but that's not the actual ape because of the record in the smart contract.
Right.
So you mentioned cybersquatting when you came in.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that is and how you see that happening right now with domain names and potentially NFTs coming soon?
Sure. Well, cybersquatting's been around for probably almost as long as the internet. And the basic concept, or the basic way this develops, is usually a company forms, they have a name, they start doing business. They don't think about getting their URL for their website immediately. Mm-hmm. And what happens is someone sees that business, usually as a result of some kind of publicity, and they take the name, and they hold it, and they basically hold it hostage until the owner that actually wants to use that domain name pays them some significant amount of money. So that's the way that we frequently see that.
Is that illegal?
It can be. Mm-hmm. There are certainly rules against it, although it's not always easy to establish, because if the person buying the domain name has some legitimate use for it, they can say that, and they may not. The party that is seeking that domain name, the party that has that company, may have no way of getting it back from them. The other thing that happens is the cybersquatter may take the domain name before the company, in this case, even thinks about filing a trademark application or getting a trademark, or their trademark gets allowed by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So trademark law can also relate to how these domain transfers work too.
Now, in that event, right, like, so I'm an employee at Apple.
Yep.
And I'm hearing them talking about AirPods. And I decide to buy the domain airpods.com.
Yeah.
And I own it, right, because I purchased it. In that event, I'm sure it's illegal, because you're inside the company and you're kind of foreseeing. Is it if you're foreseeing what a business is doing and you know about it and you deliberately try to do it, or what if it happens on accident?
Yeah, it's tough in that case, because Apple is going to need to establish why. Actually, let me take a step back. So in this case, you said the person took the AirPods name before Apple pursued it. Mm-hmm. So the question will be, how did this person know about it? Maybe they had a legitimate interest. Maybe they were going to do AirPods that were a seat that uses air or something like that.
Yeah.
So Apple's going to have to establish that they have no legitimate reason for using that domain name, and that this person knew what Apple was doing and decided to purchase the website ahead of time. But this usually happens less with disciplined companies like Apple. They'll file trademark applications and they'll buy up domain names way before they publicly release whatever they're working on. And this isn't always true, but
sure.
Most of the time it's true. Usually what this happens is with people that are starting a company for the first time, and they kind of do things out of order. So the first thing you should be thinking about before you even start selling a product is your website, your trademark, getting all this stuff in order, getting it ready before you start publicizing your company.
So I could see how that could create a lot of international conflict.
Yeah.
Because we use GoDaddy usually, right? I mean, Google Domains, GoDaddy, kind of some of the big web hosts in the United States. Other countries may use something that we've never even heard of, we don't have access to.
Yeah.
In terms of international conflict, how does copyright law hold up, especially with people stealing art, doing anything of those lines? How does that work?
Yeah, so we talked about the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and obviously that's a U.S. law that applies here in the U.S. But the U.S. has treaties with most other countries of the world where they kind of coordinate their copyright laws. So in most of the world, companies will respect U.S. copyrights and vice versa. And there's some exceptions. Russia's kind of a notorious exception. Sweden, some countries that have a very high value of freedom of speech, and the U.S. does too, of course. But some countries see that as kind of an overriding value over copyright protection, and so they don't necessarily enforce international copyrights as much.
Is that the same?
Although I use Sweden as an example, but they've kind of changed recently too.
Got it. Is that the same as patents too?
Patent law, no. In general, in patent law, when you file in a country, that's the country where the patent law applies. And you can file for patent applications in many countries. And you can file in, say, if you file in the European Patent Office, you can pursue protection in all of the countries that are part of that. But no, patent law is more local. Got it.
So cybersquatting is really, if you had the intention, it sounds like you're a better chance of getting it back or using it. Because if Apple tries to make a claim that they are going to use it for this, well, just because you're Apple doesn't mean that I wasn't going to use it for something equally as important.
Right.
So it sounds like the manipulation of the person that purchased it, cyber-squatted it. Is that when it becomes cyber-squatting, or is there...
Yeah, you really have to establish bad faith.
Sure.
So you need to say, this person took our idea for a domain name. They had no reason to do it other than just to extract money from us.
Interesting. And that's really interesting because I wonder if that's happening with NFTs, right? So I take a picture of you, I mint it.
Yeah.
That's my NFT. Maybe it's a picture you don't like. And now the only way to get it back is to pay me 2 or 3 Ethereum. How does that work?
That's a good idea, or not a good idea, but it's an interesting concept. And I don't know exactly how that would work as it relates to privacy law. But,
so what's happening when you mint something, like in terms of legality? What's happening? I understand you're securing the record that your wallet ID was the first one that minted it, that brought it into existence in the blockchain.
Right.
What else happens?
Sure. Well, really nothing much. When you're minting the NFT, you're establishing that you have some kind of ownership over that image, or at least that the NFT is connected to that image. Although, like we said, it doesn't necessarily establish that you own the copyright for that image or that you have any real rights to the image itself.
Commercial and regular, just rights.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and of course, owning the NFT doesn't even necessarily mean that you're displaying the image associated with the NFT.
It's just the image associated with the NFT itself.
Right.
So displaying it for commercial or regular reason, that falls into copyright law regardless.
Yeah.
Understood. So in that sense, if I were to, let's say, make a meme, like you've seen popular memes on the web, right? And if those creators made them as NFTs, because it's their meme, and Instagram, Facebook, and all of these pages decided to use that meme, can one use the NFT as a commercial way of granting access to use that image in per se?
You're saying, can you effectively license out the
NFTs.
Use of a meme by way of an NFT?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably a great way of doing it. And of course, that has to be captured in the smart contract. So going back to our "be careful what you're buying" concept, when you're looking at the NFT, is that NFT conveying the copyright to you? Is it giving you an exclusive license, which means that you're not getting the copyright. The creator still has the copyright, but you're the only one that can use it. Or is it a non-exclusive license? If it's a non-exclusive license, you can have the NFT, you can display the image probably, but the creator can mint 100 more of those and sell them to other people. So you have no exclusivity. And so that's something to consider. But going back to your concept of licensing, I think that's a very effective way of monetizing that process.
Because I know the topic is relatively new. So in a court, let's say something did go to trial for a meme, I doubt it. But you have the defendant who's saying, no, this is my NFT. This person's making money with it.
Yeah.
Do they have legal ground because it's on the blockchain and it's their record and it's tied to their wallet ID, which is tied to their social? And do they have legal ground there, or is there more investigation you think that would have to happen?
Does the copyright owner?
Yeah, right.
Well, yes. And in fact, the fact that everything is stored on the blockchain and all the transactions are controlled and you can trace each transaction to a particular person with some certainty, it actually probably helps your case in court because you can better document the evidence. And NFTs, though, there's some interesting aspects that I think haven't been really addressed by the courts as it relates to how the contract is actually understood in the NFT. So I've mentioned that NFTs have a smart contract. It's embedded, or rather, it's part of the NFT. It's a contract that's essentially written in programming code, and it performs certain actions. So if NFT is sold, buyer pays X% to the creator, and that could be handled by taking some amount of Ether and sending it to the creator's wallet, and that can all happen automatically. But courts haven't really, at least not that I'm aware of, haven't really addressed these smart contracts in traditional contract law. So contract law has been around, I don't know, thousands of years maybe.
Sure.
And we've gotten very good at identifying, all right, this language means this language means that. Contract needs an offer, it needs an acceptance, these sorts of things. But I don't think courts really know yet how they're going to interpret code aspects of the contracts. So when they see when you read a provision in a contract, it's a royalty provision, we can be reasonably sure what it means.
Because it's in language.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Someone accepted it, someone
but a
offered
judge or a jury may not be necessarily ready to read coding language and understand it in the same way.
Interesting.
Kind of the alternative to that is that contract language can be subjective, right? So if I say, if there's a good faith provision in the contract that says, you will in good faith negotiate some term, do both parties agree on what that means? Whereas coding language in the smart contract, the computer's only going to execute that one way.
Right. There's no faith. There's no...
Exactly. So it
moving.
also allows some accuracy that may not be present in traditional contracts.
Yeah, it sounds like true.
I may have digressed from the question.
No, that was a very good answer because you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that a lot of it comes down to truth and transparency. Although there's a lot of fraud, like you said, 80% of the things that are minted on OpenSea are stolen.
Right, and that's I think that was bound to happen.
Yeah,
with the NFT enthusiasm over the last year or so. But that is going away to some extent as companies crack down on it.
Sure. And I think that's OpenSea's responsibility is to start to filter what's going on their platform.
Sure.
Even
if
though
they want to have a long-term presence.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it's good for them raising money, like, hey, we had 12 million NFTs minted this year, and investors are like, great. But 80% of them are frauds. Now you have a different issue.
Yeah.
Now the users aren't going to trust the platform. But to create a smart contract, you need programming language.
Sure.
OpenSea comes in, you mint it, gives you the program language you want, and you're good to go, right? On their platform, you pay the fee, whatever it is, and they make money.
Right.
So we talked a little bit about contracts, which is interesting because a smart contract, like you said, is programming that kind of is just like, hey, this is the rules. There's no faith. There's no lying, nothing, right? And you talk about faith contracts, which is how we do business now. In the faith approach, what is technically a contract, legally binding contract between two people? What does that look like? What does it need, and what can you exclude from it?
Oh, wow. That's a big picture topic, right?
I sell you a website. What needs to be in that contract for it to
All
be
right.
legal?
So the basics of a contract are offer and acceptance, and there has to be some kind of consideration, which means that something has to change hands. It can be money, it can be a good, it could be an obligation of some sort. As long as it's something, then the consideration step is met. For offer and acceptance, what you have is essentially a meeting of the minds, right? So if we're making a contract, we are discussing the terms, you understand the terms, I understand the terms, and we agree to the terms. And that's kind of the ideal contract situation, right?
Yeah.
And that's, with smart contracts, I'm not sure that that's always present, which, could be a problem. You've worked with NFTs a lot, so maybe you have some insight into whether purchasers actually are looking at these smart contracts and know what's in them. And so can you agree to contract terms if you can't read the coding language in the contract, or if you aren't aware that it exists, maybe? So those are things that I don't think have been determined yet, and I'm sure they will come up as people get products that they weren't expecting.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think in that sense, the intermediary works very well.
That's true.
The real estate brokerage you were talking about, who holds the Ethereum, holds the property, verifies, then exchanges.
Right.
Because if I were to go, hey, check out this Bored Ape, and you're like, oh my God, Bored Apes are so cool. I heard they're going for $500,000. I said, well, I'm gonna give it to you today for $1,000. Same artwork on OpenSea, right? Looks legit. You don't know though, because you're high on the idea of it going to $100,000 in a few months.
Sure.
You get scammed that way, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure that can happen a lot. So the contract is really offer and acceptance, and some sort of tangible trade, whether it's money, time, value.
Right.
And
I mean, that's the basic concept of the contract. But, I mean, the big picture here is you need to actually look and see what you're getting. Are you getting an exclusive license? Are you getting some kind of obligations that you don't want? Do you have to pay some kind of royalty to the seller or to the creator?
Interesting.
Right.
So the way the news networks buy things now from creators, where they have clips and they go, hey, we'll pay you for that clip. Is there any benefit for the creators of those clips to use them as NFTs, or is there just here, take the video and give me cash? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think this is an aspect that NFTs could really improve, because all of that is being handled digitally. So instead of, the advantage of the NFT smart contract is that everything is being executed automatically. X condition happens, X amount of money goes from, first person to second person. And all of that happens without anyone having to look at the contract, say, okay, I have to do this, you have to do that, and let's make it happen. So
interesting.
So with, like you said, some kind of clip of, let's say if it's a clip from Ukraine right now, and some news agency wants to buy it from the person who recorded it. It would be, the NFT process would streamline that, because the creator could create an NFT with that media clip, and then it's just a matter of exchanging the cryptocurrency associated with it.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting, because now you're in a world where you know who owns what, and content isn't stolen. You know that the news companies didn't take them manipulatively, like you can check. So I think a lot of it has to do with that truth and transparency.
Yeah.
Your top tips on not getting sued for copyright and IP law.
Don't copy anything.
What if you don't know? What if you don't know you're copying something?
If the number of occurrences where someone was just independently creating something and it was exactly the same as
very rare,
right? So if you're taking an image from the internet, make sure you know what you're doing. Is this an open source image? If you don't know it's open source, then just assume that it's not. And that's how this frequently comes up, is people, they see stuff, they like it, they use it, they don't think about that. Another concept to consider is that attribution does not give you a license to use a copyrighted asset. So
explain that. What do you mean by
sure.
attribution?
So if I take some photograph from CNN and I publish it somewhere, and I say this came from CNN, well, no, that's still possibly infringement. Just giving them credit doesn't necessarily excuse my behavior there.
Interesting. Now, do you think that is more important when the person that's crediting CNN for taking that photo is making money from that in a way that CNN's making money from it? Because I know on YouTube forces you to write where you got your sources if anything was taken from anywhere.
Right.
And then it notifies the creator and it says this person used your video in this video. Do you want to dispute it? Most creators will go, look, they gave me the credit. That's just fine.
Right.
In a sense, when do you think it's like an absolute you can't use that piece of content?
Well, the key is to ask first, I think. And like you said, most content creators, or at least a lot of content creators, would be happy to let you use their stuff because they're getting exposure out of it, which is good for them. Companies, bigger companies, particularly anyone who is monetizing their content is probably going to be less enthusiastic about you taking their products. So, if some news agency sent their photographers over somewhere and they're taking pictures and then they're using these pictures to sell a news article or publication or whatever, they probably won't be too happy about you using their photos. But the key is to, contact them and see
if it's
they're
okay
okay
to
with
use
it or not. Right.
their contents.
Right.
And if you did, they still have to follow the process of the cease and desist, the notification that they're not okay with you using the content, or is there ever a situation where it's straight to we're suing you?
Yeah, I mean, you can go straight to that.
Really?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It doesn't always happen that way, but usually it's, especially if it's just some person on the internet who, without thinking, used some photograph. Suing them is probably not going to be very cost effective. And some law firms exist basically just to search for pictures of their clients that are being used on the internet, send them a letter that says, give us $500 or we're going to sue you. The idea, of course, is to pick some relatively low amount of money that
people are okay
discourages
with
the infringement, but doesn't actually lead them to a lawsuit.
Interesting.
And so, that can be a quick way to discourage people from using your photos and also enforce your copyrights.
Interesting. Now, when it comes to some of that stuff that we were talking about earlier in terms of the contract and the NFT, so you mentioned the two different types of licensing that you could potentially have, where it's exclusive, where it's like, I'm physically giving you my document, and it's going to your wallet, or one lives in mine and it's minted multiple and you can kind of use it how you see fit.
Yeah.
How do you see that changing stock images, stock videography, social media? A lot of these pages use memes as an example. People take pictures of memes. No one knows who the original owner is besides them crediting it, but that page is making money from it. Where do you see that changing in owning the media and using that media? Kind of like what we just talked about with the news.
Yeah. The good, the advantage of NFTs there is that you're creating a record of the ownership, which makes it a little more easy to both enforce your content and also to see where the content is coming from. Right. Like you said, these memes, no one knows who created them.
It's almost like the person that's in the meme, the subject,
right,
or whoever owns the copyright of it should be compensated, but there's no record to find out where it came from.
Sure, and maybe the person doesn't care.
Right.
Probably 95% of the time
they don't
care at all.
Yeah. Interesting.
But the way NFTs are implemented into the blockchain provides at least some manner of being able to track these things and ownership of them.
Interesting. Does your law firm accept cryptocurrency?
No. We're maybe someday, but we haven't advanced to that point yet.
Interesting. I mean, if there's no need, then there's no need, right?
Right. I'm not sure most of our clients would be interested in using that.
Your international clients?
I could see that being more more relevant for some of the international clients.
Got it.
But right now no one's been beating down our door asking to use cryptocurrency.
Yeah, interesting. Because you're doing normal traditional wire transfers.
Yep.
With a lot of your clients.
Yep.
Interesting. And so, what are you learning about now with your field of study?
Oh boy. Well, the great thing about patent law is that kind of every day is different, right? You're seeing new inventions that, by nature of being involved in the patent process, no one's seen before, at least generally. And these can be technology areas that are all over. Could be jet engines, medical devices, computer implemented methods, all kinds of stuff. So I'm always learning about new technology areas and technology areas that I didn't even know existed at one time. So that's kind of my focus right now.
Did you read up on that whole Theranos thing with Elizabeth Holmes and the blood testing?
I am not overly familiar with that. I just know that she may have exaggerated the functionality of their product.
So patent squatting is a real thing too then? Is that possible?
Well, I mean, so there's different views on this. Some people think that applying for patents and then just not really using the patent to do anything, but just asserting the patent to force people to give you money. Some people think that's bad. Some people think it's fine. Why shouldn't you be able to do that? So that does exist, and that is kind of a controversy that continues to this day.
Because in her case scenario, she had the rapid blood test. That was kind of the thing about Theranos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody that was close to her was patenting her future businesses. So blood tests at home with this technology. And is there any legitimacy in that, or is that kind of, like you said, registering it and kind of just praying?
Well, it depends where they got the information from. I mean, did they steal the information from Theranos or from Elizabeth Holmes?
What's considered stealing, like a conversation at a bar? Or?
Right. Well, if you had, a conversation at a bar, probably not. If you have a non-disclosure agreement with someone and then you take that information and you secretly file a patent application.
Well, that's
that
pretty
could
clear.
be a problem, right?
How about an email?
If you pay an employee of a company to secretly give you information, insider information from the company, that could be an example.
Interesting.
What was the example that you?
How about an email?
An email.
Hey, I have an idea.
Well, how did you intercept this email?
I wrote an email to you about a blood test from home in the near future with my company.
Okay, so we don't have an agreement between us. In this case, I'd probably be free to run with it, unless we have some kind of long-standing agreement, or if I'm acting as your lawyer, I wouldn't be able to do that. But yeah, there's if you find out about something through legitimate means, there's nothing stopping you from filing your own patent application most of the time.
Interesting. So the email really doesn't assume a business agreement.
Right.
It's just a point of communication.
Right.
But if you're already in business agreement, can the emails act as future business agreements, or? So if we signed a contract, a non-solicit, non-disclosure, whatever it may be, any email after that contract between us can be used in court based on the agreement we signed, or?
Yeah, well, it depends on the non-disclosure agreement. So generally the non-disclosure agreement will have, it will say this is the subject matter that the non-disclosure agreement pertains to. So maybe we're talking about blood testing devices. And then you send me an email about a new device, a new engine for a car, right? Is that covered by our non-disclosure agreement? Probably not. But if it has something to do with blood testing devices, then sure, that would be covered.
Now, most of these contracts between people are valid for, usually there's no contract end dates with a lot of these things.
And that could be a problem.
Oh, exactly. So tell me a little bit about contract end dates and how those are enforced.
Right. Well, you need contracts and I should mention contract law varies from state to state. But
if you're doing national business, though,
right, the key, you want there to be an aspect of reasonability to the contract. So a non-disclosure agreement that goes on forever could be problematic. It kind of depends on what's the development cycle for this product. Are we going to have it ready for a product in 3 months, 3 years? Is this going to take us 20 years? What's the expectation there? So it'll vary in every case, but you want to be thinking about what is overreach. Specifically, if these two entities are both involved in the same industry, a court may find it unreasonable if a contract binds them for some unnecessary amount of time as it relates to whatever they were discussing.
Got it. So they're looking at product development time, reasonable time.
This is where the reasonability comes in, the subjectivity of contracts, traditional contracts.
Yeah, and sometimes that's a good thing.
It can be, but
or it could be a very bad thing.
I usually find that it's much better to be clear than to be vague, because maybe you'll get a win if your contract is vague, but
in the future
it can bite you too, right? So.
Yeah, interesting. So like a 50-year contract of somebody having a website with us. First of all, I don't think anybody would sign that. But second of all, if they did sign it and it's been, 5 years and they're just like, well, that's just unrealistic. Is that something that they could argue?
Well, again, we were talking about non-disclosure agreements, but, if this is a web development agreement or something like that, there's no strict limit on what the maximum time frame could be. Maybe 50 years is appropriate. I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to
sign that
to
document,
do that,
yeah.
but it may not be unreasonable.
Interesting. Cool. So, what are you working on today?
I'm working on the weekend today.
Are you? Is today a weekend for you?
Yeah, we're getting there.
Oh, cool.
No, just the kind of the usual stuff. I actually had a number of we're talking about copyright incidents here, a number of copyright infringement incidents come up this week on the internet, so I had to chase down a few Chinese companies that were using our clients' images. They're basically taking their product images and then putting it on their website to use them to try to sell a product. So we pursued those web hosts for that,
and how are you finding those web hosts?
It can be difficult, and this is kind of your bread and butter area, and I'm only starting to learn it. But a lot of these web hosts are generally companies will use Cloudflare, which can kind of obscure who the web host is. Sometimes it can be hard to find out who the web host is. Sometimes the web host, we had a case recently where the web host was in Russia, and we told our client that it's going to be difficult to pursue something there. We can, but it's difficult, especially right now.
But why does the client care if I understand that there's a value of intellectual property, but if it's not going to be used against you or to hurt your business and it's international, do you think first of all, is the client doing international business? That might be why. But second of all, why do they care so much?
Well, for any company that's selling a unique product, they want that to be, the uniqueness of the product is one of the big selling points, right? It's what allows you to charge a premium over what other people may be selling. So if someone else is selling a product that is the same as yours or substantially the same as yours, that affects your business. I mean, even if they are not selling it in a large quantity, or maybe they're just selling it in some other country, there's concerns there for how it affects your brand specifically.
So there's a saying that goes, real business is done on paper, right? How does companies like DocuSign affect contract law, intellectual property law, and anything along the lines of, agreement and acknowledgement?
As far as the use of digital signatures for signing contracts, the federal law allows digital signatures to be used. so long as they can be validated in some way. So DocuSign they've actually performed a pretty useful function in validating that the person who is supposed to be signing this document is actually
Signed
the
it.
one who did sign it.
Interesting.
Right, which may not be present all the time in digital contracts, right? Because if you enter into a contract through an online form, how do I know that it was you that actually signed it? I could probably find out that it was done from your computer maybe, or at least from your IP address, but I don't know that it was you that signed the contract. So they have kind of improved the evidentiary process as it relates to digital signatures.
Yeah, that's a major task for DocuSign, and I know they're using the blockchain already.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, I could hack into your email and accept a document, no problem,
Yep,
from your house.
Yep, exactly.
So how legally binding is it actually if somebody said, I didn't sign this, or whatever
Right,
that may be?
Right. With a signature, at least, a traditional signature, a handwritten signature, at least
see
you
the
can do
person.
some analysis to see whether it's their signature or not. But if I'm just typing a name on a line, who knows who that was?
Interesting. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It was very informational. I think I learned a lot. I think people listening, I know Paul had a lot of questions when it came to contracts. But before we head out, what are your immediate pieces of advice for any entrepreneur starting a new business?
Okay, so going back to the domain name, get your domain name, get your trademark, make sure everything's ready before you publicize your business. If you are in a field that's relying on patent law or some kind of technological development, you need to consider that too. Just make sure everything is ready before you officially open the door and publicize yourself on the internet.
How long do you think Facebook started trademarking Meta before they made that change?
Well, you can only do it so far in advance, but I'm sure they were ready before they made their official announcement. Although, and it's also, I should mention that when you file a trademark application with the USPTO, it becomes public after a certain amount of time. So you also don't want to necessarily do it too fast because you tip your hand into what you're preparing before you're ready to actually
Launch it.
debut it. Right.
How long is that time frame?
A couple months.
A couple months.
Yeah.
Got it. Understood. All right, Chris, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Cool.